Well, tonight, as you know, we have the honor of getting this opportunity to engage in these Empower Plus sessions. These are all designed for people. We thought it was across the United States, but our recent data have shown us this is now having an increasing large digital footprint also across the world. So we're excited to see many friends internationally using these resources, designed to help meet students' multiple needs, their academic, their behavior, and social and emotional well-being needs, all caught up into one integrated tiered system. And I know a lot of you are in places where you have different tiered systems in place. Some are more focused on academics, some are more focused on behavior, some are focused on combinations of those things. And in Ci3T, we have been working to enhance this model that was started in the late 1990s, actually 1996. And we are in the no-cost extension of a grant funded by the Institute of Education Sciences called Project Enhance. And as you navigate your way to this page, you're going to see a giant amount of resources. We were initially funded to develop 8 modules. And based on the incredible contributions of more than 27 schools over a period of 5 years of time, we've learned a lot about what was needed. And during this time, we've collected new friends and colleagues. For example, we now have coaches like Tammy and Joni and Howard, who were initially principals and educators in the schools that were doing this, and it is a dream come true to get to work with them as well in this coaching capacity. If you are brand new to these modules, we'd like you to know that there is an infographic that you might want to access at your convenience or share with others if you decided to share it outside of today, to help you navigate how to go through those. And during one of our breakouts, we will have coaches that will come in and help you get started. But as you're looking at this journey tonight, we're thinking about meeting multiple students' needs. We want you to know it is a journey. In this one series that we're offering with Project Empower, this is, I often say it's kind of like speed dating for professional learning. There is no long-term commitment here. You can come to one, you can come to all, but it is designed for faculty, staff, families, and community members. So if some of you who are here tonight think, man, I'd love to bring so-and-so who's one of our agency partners or family members, by all means, please bring them. We host these sessions throughout the years so that we're making sure that we're putting tools in people's hands to help them really do great data-informed decision-making for instruction for students, as well as data-informed professional learning for adults. Tonight, we've got a few objectives. We would like to focus tonight on the topic of systematic screening. This is something that is near and dear to Wendy and I, who have been working on this for a number of years. And tonight, we want to talk about how screening fits into these integrated tiered systems. We're focusing on Ci3T, but the logic is the same for all. We are going to talk tonight about how you're going to get to use these data to look at your school as a whole to determine if there's a tier 1 need. You're going to look at it by classroom to see if teachers might benefit from the use of some low intensity supports that can increase engagement, limit disruption. And we're going to be looking at information on how to use screening data, not in isolation, but with other data collected as part of regular school practices to connect kids to tier 2 and tier 3 supports. And when you are looking at this system, we do not want to engage in this use of data-informed instruction without also paying attention to, is it in place? So throughout this evening, we'll be talking about treatment integrity, really taking time to look at what I say it happening at tier 1, is it really happening? And making sure that we're garnering input, not just at tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, but also at tier 1 in terms of social validity. And this is important because we don't want to ethically say to a family, we think your child needs more than tier 1 has to offer if we're not even sure they're getting it. So this is the agenda for where we're going. We've got wonderful presenters tonight and amazing coaches. So you've got the dream team. So let's go ahead and jump in. So to get started for tonight, I want to show you that you're going to be in a couple different places. This is the place where you went to register for this session. And Elise has done an incredible job of weaving through pre-corrections for tonight to let you know what's coming next and how you can know that when we talk about all these things that you can do with systematic screening data, we are going to remind you that we've got time coming up for future sessions that will also put some tools in your toolkit, and we're going to connect you to some other resources that Rebecca shared. Has taken the lead on creating as part of our work with the National Center for Positive Behavior Interventions and Support. So let's go ahead and talk about systematic screening in Ci3T models in general. When we talk about what we're sharing tonight, I want to honor the work and contribution from literally thousands of educators across the country. Some of the data, the findings that we're going to share with you tonight are from samples as large as 75,000 kids. And that is not an exaggeration. So I want you to know our lessons are rich, and it's come from really positive and productive conversations and people that are not afraid to ask the hard questions. And so tonight, in response to that, when we do some of our breakout rooms tonight, you'll see that if you have some personal questions, not like personal life, but personal related to screening, we'll have some consult rooms that you can pop into to get those questions asked and answered. But this work tonight is situated within Ci3T. And instead of having like separate lists for academic, behavior, and social, like tier 2 and tier 3 supports, our focus is on integration and using those multiple sources of data to determine how best to meet students' needs. And when we think about the base experience, what kids are getting when they come in to instruction in a school, just to remind people, in this model, the priority is making sure that we're using validated resources to address academic, district, and state standards, that we are at the core framed in positive behavior interventions and support. I am here tonight, and Rebecca will be here tomorrow in Chicago, where we're actually going to get to present with some of our wonderful district partners to share some of the lessons we've learned, including how to address triage for trauma within these sessions. Those are things that we're going to be doing here, so stay tuned for that. But in terms of positive behavior intervention supports, it's teaching expected behaviors that are developed in a Ci3T system with input from the entire community to find out what people think they need to know for kids to be successful. In addition, when people build out their Ci3T model, they pick a validated resource. And then we do not recommend a certain resource, but we encourage people to work within the structure of What Works Clearinghouse to find out what works for whom and under what condition. These are names of some of the tools and resources that district partners have been using. But before we talk about screening, we really need to be clear on what the base is. I think Wendy and I have probably collaborated for a little more than 15 years. And some of the earlier presentations that we used to do had this mantra of, before you screen, have a plan to intervene. And that is why we are starting this conversation about knowing what is happening at tier 1. I cannot emphasize enough how important this is, because we need to know what is happening at tier 1 so that when you use the screening data, it's going to give you a window into what is happening in terms of determining, are there additional needs at tier 1? Are we ready to proceed to empowering teachers with those low intensity supports? And are we ready to start connecting kids to support? So if you are at a school implementing Ci3T, or if you're not yet, we have samples on the website that people can show you. But inside the pages of those manuals, which you can find on that Responding to COVID-19 tab, we have some exemplars there. When you walk into those, these all initially start off as a blank set of blueprints. And in it, we go through this manualized process to help people put a team together from their school with the district direction to make determinations about how are we going to define what every educator, every student, every family member, every administrator is going to need to know about what's going to happen academically, behaviorally, and socially. So for example, in terms of faculty and staff, think about the gift of this, that in the pages of these manuals, you have it mapped out. It's like a playbook for your school. And in it, it's telling faculty and staff members, including long-term substitute teachers, here's what we're going to teach. And you'll notice that there's a range of strategies that are listed in the academic columns, because those are things we want every single adult to be able to access to maximize engagement and limit disruption. And in addition to teaching expected behavior, we also want to make sure that we know that every single adult that's interacting with kids has a planned response when behavior is not where we need it to be. And it's not a hostile one. It's not yelling. It's starting with showing empathy, maintaining the flow of instruction, acknowledging other students that are meeting expectations, and so on. In addition to having planned time to actually teach those social and emotional well-being skill sets to build self-determined behaviors, to become lifelong learners, that's actually going to get woven into the daily fabric of instruction. So when we talk about screening tonight, this is the backdrop. Ideally, this is what's happening. All that's being taught, all that's being acknowledged. And tonight, our big focus is on how do we use the data to see what is actually happening in terms of implementation, and how do we use data to make decisions about what to do next. So within Ci3T modules, and this is not a research thing, this is a life thing, in fall, in spring, every adult in the building gives input on here's what I think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes. They do it in fall, they do it in spring, and they're doing that so that they're giving input to the people that are providing professional learning to say, here's where I'm at. They also collect information on treatment integrity to know what's happening in terms of instruction and reinforcement, and they tell you how they're using data. The screening that we're talking about tonight is a big piece of that. And so within these modules, we now have resources in the modules to help you implement this Ci3T model. So tonight, we're going to talk about some of the resources that are on demand, free access, that are designed to help you to get this in place to create these very positive, productive environments. And when I was just talking about that 6-step to instructional approach to responding to challenging behavior, that's one of the most sought after professional learnings. That's one of our highest hit rates of people going there. And also you'll see resources on how this fits into the pre-referral intervention process, and how the fact that there are no tier 2 kids, there are no tier 3 kids, there are kids that have additional needs, and kids that are receiving special education services are accessing all of this wonderful support. And it's intended to create this partnership between general ed and special education communities. As part of it, we're going to start to get a closer look tonight about this tier 2 process, about specifically how do we determine who does need more than tier 1 has to offer. And in this, we want to make sure that we're using data to connect kids to other supports based on their individual needs, and being certain that tier 1 is happening as planned, because that is our first line of defense. Similarly, there are also tier 3 interventions. And when we look at those, we are looking at validated resources designed for students with the most intensive intervention needs. This does not mean that it's necessarily every kid that's receiving an IEP, like our special education services, they're going to have these, but there's a number of resources there. So the message that I want you to hear, please, before we talk about screening, is that there needs to be clarity on what we're doing for all, for some, and for a few, and the focus is on integration. Sometimes people will say when they're looking at screening data, where do I start? They're below benchmark on reading and math and behavior. Which one do I do first? And the answer is all of them. We're going to address this in an integrated way, and we'll talk about how to do that feasibly. So as we dip a toe into that idea of systematic screening, specifically thinking about behavior screening, we're going to start there. I want to be really clear. This is super similar to what you've been doing in terms of academic screening and fall wintering screening, except for 2 main distinctions. There are a bunch of different screenings. Tonight, we're talking about teacher completed screening tools. So unlike academics, where you do the fall screening as soon as students come back from summer break, in this approach, when you're doing behavior screenings, you wait 4 to 6 weeks after the school year begins. And that's when teachers complete that first set of fall screening. And it's every single kid. So it doesn't require time with kids. These are independently teacher completed measures. We were in a school 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, maybe, it feels like dog years, where we were watching teachers do their screening. And at one point, 2 teachers started to talk to each other, and the vice principal at the school did such a beautiful job of saying, hey, just a general reminder, these need to be completed independently, because that is how those are normed. And I thought it was just such a beautiful example of somebody being present and making sure that the data were reliable. So these pieces get done in fall, winter, and spring. And tonight, when you go into your second breakout room conversation, you might choose to go take a peek at one of these 2 new modules. One's about behavior screening in general, and one is about the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing behavior. And in the pages of these, you're going to see resources that we think you can walk out today with an action plan. If you're already screening, these are going to give you resources to support what you're doing. If you're not yet screening, these are going to give you points of education so that you can start having some informed discussions. You're going to see things like infographics. You're going to see some guides for working with your data. You're going to see some instructional videos, and it's going to help you to be very practical and helping people to know that this isn't subjective. These are reliable and valid. They're completed on every single student. The benefits are that not only is it used to shape instructions for students, it's also going to shape in professional learning from adults. But in terms of the students, it's going to allow you to look at what's happening for the system as a whole, what's happening in individual classrooms, and what are the needs of kids that need more than Tier 1 has to offer. And as I mentioned just a few moments ago, there's a whole bank of resources that our team has been able to put together that are also available on pbis.org. So if a friend of mine can, maybe Eric can pop that into the chat, pbis.org, you're going to see a bunch of resources. And this is the most recent. There's an infographic that you'll see on the right that Rebecca recently finished. And that actually has links to every single resource that's on that website related to screening. You're also going to see on our website on ci3t.org that there's multiple different points of information about different screenings. And each one has different information about who it's normed with, how it's been validated, what age level it's appropriate for, what types of behaviors are you looking for. But in general, we want to make sure that you pick something that is looking for both major challenges of childhood. So internalizing, shy, anxious, withdrawn, and acting out, like non-compliance out of your seat, externalizing behavior patterns. And I have to tell you, as a wife and as a mother and as an educator, my biggest concern is for kids that have internalizing issues, because those kids are not doing things typically that would result in them needing, result in them earning like office discipline referrals, which could be another flag. Our team does quite a bit of research with SRSS-IE because it's the last of the free access screening tools. Although there are now companies that use this where you can access their systems, but this remains freely available to you. These are teacher completed measures. People consider one kid, rate across, and every student gets a total score. And right now there's the same 12 items for use K through 12, but the scoring is different for elementary compared to middle and high school. The way it works right now is that every single kid has a score, and that score will actually put them into one of three categories: low, moderate, and high risk for internalizing, and low, moderate, and high risk for externalizing. And these data are not used to exclude. These data are going to be used to shape instructional experiences in your building. For example, here's data from an elementary school on their externalizing behavior patterns. That you can see they've been screening for a long time, since 2014. And over time, you can see that leading up and through the pandemic, you see increases in the percentage of kids at low risk. And initially following the pandemic, you saw that although behavior may have felt terrible at points, it was actually not as much externalizing behavior patterns as it was prior to the pandemic. You can also get this same window into looking what's happening with internalizing issues. And if you do have data, because it's not always going to look like this perfect, but you're going to have some times where data show that it's like 50% of the kids are scoring in the green, and that's the low risk category. And in that case, then we know we've got work to do at 2-2 and tier 3. And this is also going to give you an opportunity to unpackage it, to see what's happening at grade levels, like at kindergarten, first and second grade. So this decision making is going to happen within professional learning communities for the school as a whole. So these data are actually used. Here are data from a school. And incidentally, the person that was the vice principal at this school at the very beginning later became the principal, and I just got a text from him literally last week, which was wonderful to hear from him. But these are practices that are not new. Look at the dates on this. This was 2004. This is a middle school that was looking at it, and it's not every screening happening for every single period. It's actually one period a day for middle and high school. And that might be something we want to consult on later. You identify one period a day where it gets completed for all. But it gives you that sense of what's happening for the school as a whole. And whatever screening tool you're going to pick, we do want to make sure that you have done your due diligence to make sure it's normed on the same types of students that you're working with. So like, for example, for the SRSS-IE, with those large scale studies, we now know that that tool functions the same way for boys and girls, kids that are white and kids that are Black, kids that are white and kids that are of color, kids that are receiving special education service and those who are not. You want to see, does the tool have established measurement invariance? And just like you need to do for academic screening data, you want to use it. So you want to use those multiple sources of data. And as I mentioned, we're going to use them in those three ways to see what's happening for the school as a whole, unpacking it by teachers, and it's not making separate decisions by what you're seeing academically and behaviorally. We want to look at those together. And it's not just those data, it's also things like attendance data. These are data from one of the trackers that we have in one of the modules. And it's going to be important for you to look at things like attendance and tardies, as well as office discipline referrals and externalizing and internalizing behavior patterns, because this is going to tell you a picture. Your intervention for a kid that has missed a ton of school and has internalizing behaviors and low reading is very different than the kid who shows up every single day and is still struggling in those areas. But before we jump into this, we're going to go into our first breakout room, and there you're going to have a conversation to think about what some of the benefits are of systematic screening, what you view to be some of the challenges, and we're going to start to compile some of the questions that you have. And then we have a sheet where we're going to be listening and recording some of your questions so that we can incorporate those to the balance of this evening. To see so many people here to get information about making good decisions about systematic screening and getting it in place. And for those that are already doing this to want to learn more. And I was planning on playing Montel Jordan in the background. This is how we do it. I normally would sing this for you at this point, but my team has asked me to refrain from that activity. But I do want to say this is the beginning of how we do it. And the whole rest of this series is going to be showing how data are used throughout. So as mentioning, we're not trying to trap you, but hopefully to entice you to come back so we can continue to learn together. Thank you so much, Eric. Love everything about you. All right. And with that, we're going to turn over to good friend and colleague, Dr. Wendy Oates.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and thank you all for that discussion. At least in my room, it sounds like people are fairly new to screening and really thinking about how it can come into the work to better support students. So I'm not sure if that is a similar theme across rooms, but it was a nice conversation about benefits, the things we're thinking about as we're installing screening, and then so now we're going to move into how we talk about looking at data and how we use these data to actually make decisions within tiered systems. Now, this is one screener for one school, and this is the Social Skills Improvement System. And this is a previous screener that actually is still available, but now it's one of a set, and it's the Performance Screening Guide. And there are 4 items, as you can see by the graph, that teachers complete on each of the students in their class. So it takes about a few seconds, probably to less than a minute for each student, just in terms of how much time these different screeners take. And in the chat, what I would love for you to do is think about, where do you think, based on this information, this is one screening time point for one school, but if I'm a school leader or on a leadership team and I'm looking at these data, where do you think I should be targeting my efforts? At tier 1, we're thinking tiered systems. So is it at tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3? In the chat, where do you think you would focus your efforts based on this? Okay, mostly tier 1s. We have a couple of tier 2s. For this one, we would recommend that you would focus on tier 1. And the reason is because you have less than half, or about half, of your students who are meeting expectations, meaning in that low level of risk. So they're doing well with their reading, doing well with math, pro-social behavior, and motivation to learn. So really where you're going to get the biggest impact for the most kids is really focusing in depth on tier 1. So that is one example of how you can think about using your school level data, screening data, to make some decisions about instructional planning. Now let's look at this one. Let's see if I can change my screen. Okay, so this is for a high school. And if we notice the x-axis, we have over time. So this is the F is fall. So it's fall 2015 through fall of 2022 for this particular graph. And this looks pretty good at tier 1, doesn't it? It looks like, I mean, well over that 80% threshold that we would expect for kids that are performing as expected, doing well in terms of external behavior at the high school. As we're looking at these, we would want to be asking some questions as we start to see any sort of shifts or dips. Okay, so if we see a year where we have an increase in risk, what we might ask ourselves is, how are we doing on treatment integrity? Are we implementing our model as intended? Do kids have access to the supports that we have planned for them? And if not, then that's a place that you would target. You could also look at it to say, do we have new faculty and staff who have joined us who maybe haven't had the same benefit of professional learning? Do we want to target some professional learning specifically for for those faculty, or there might be some other reasons. Certainly for this one, we have some differences between fall of 21 and fall of 22. We all lived through that. We know the experience, probably related to COVID, potentially, but we'd want to make sure we're looking further into those data. So let's look at the next graph. Okay, this one is the same school, same time points for internalizing. And we actually look like we're doing fairly well here. Again, from fall of 21 to 22, we want to think about what we have in place as students are dealing with the end of the, pandemic sequestering, if you will, and being out of school and away from friends and that isolation. What could we bring into our school that we might not have had already? However, we also want to dig deeper at this. So we want to look at grade level. So we want to unpack these data into meaningful units for your school. So it may be your grade level. If you're in a high school, you might even look at departments, depending on how you team and how you wrap experts and educators around students. But what do you notice in particular about this? Because our green looks pretty good. We're above the 80% as we would expect. We're right within the ranges. Actually, we have fewer kids at the senior level, right, who are experiencing high levels of risk. But what else are you noticing that could be impacting what we think to be really solid looking data for our kids? Tier 3 might seem a little bit high. We do have some where we're hitting higher levels for our younger students. So that's something we could consider absolutely as we're transitioning students into high school. We might want to look at students who might need more coming out of their middle school. We've got some things going on around 10th grade, so we could put some supports in our 10th grade for sure. So we have lots of ways that we can be thinking about what kinds of supports we need. And if you look at these data in particular, what you'll notice is that the number of students screened actually decreases by grade level. And typically you would have sort of a proportionate amount of students in each grade level. But at the high school level, in this high school in particular, we're seeing fewer and fewer kids. So do we actually know that our risk is shifting in terms of coming down and that we're better supporting kids with what we're doing? Or is it that we're losing some of those kids as they start to age into our system? And so looking at your data, questioning your data, asking why you see certain patterns, all of the patterns that you put in the chat are things that would be worth exploring. So at tier 1, this provides us a lot of information for how we can proceed as we're moving through. Okay, so now let's think about how we start to use these data from an instructional perspective. So our focus at tier 1 is making sure that we are taking an instructional approach to all 3 of our learning domains. So our learning domains are across the bottom of the model. They are academic, behavior, and social skills. And we want to be doing that in an integrated way so that when students are challenged, whether they're challenged socially, challenged behaviorally, or challenged academically, they're actually getting authentic learning opportunities to practice these skills and to receive feedback from the educators in their lives who are there to help improve their educational outcomes and their experiences at school. So let's look a little bit deeper at the integrated lesson plan. The integrated lesson plan is one tool that is available for you to help your educators think about addressing all 3 of these learning domains in an integrated way. And so this is just an illustration of a plan. This can be downloaded, it can be adapted, it can be changed to fit your instructional plan that you have. But the highlights here really are that you're thinking about what do we expect from kids academically, what social skills will they need to engage in that academic task, and what are the behavioral expectations that we would review in advance or help support them with so that they can be successful in that learning environment. Important to this is also, and Elise is going to talk about a little bit more about this as we go through the evening, but important to this is these low intensity strategies that provide us a lot of support for engaging kids in learning and also helping them be productive socially. So active supervision is something that teachers can very easily implement across any lesson, behavior specific praise in any context, offering choice, instructional feedback, and so forth. So these are a way to prompt teachers to think about how to make sure they're embedding these and giving students the support, practice, and feedback that they need in this learning process. We're going to watch this video, and it is about just a little over a minute long, and it is an illustration of what I'm talking about with the integrated lesson plan.
In this example of integrating academic behavior and social domains, the teacher begins by selecting a social skill and building practice opportunities into the academic lesson plan. She reviews office discipline data for her class and finds students were having difficulties in non-instructional areas that resulted in disagreements, arguments, and even some fights related to differences in opinion. She decides students would benefit from practice with the social skill of perspective taking. So she creates a way for students to practice the skill by discussing the characters in their current novel, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. She begins the lesson plan by revisiting the social skill lesson on perspective taking so students see the explicit connection between the previously taught social skill lesson and their character discussion. Then, in small groups, students discuss specific scenes from the novel and how actions were interpreted by each of the characters differently based on their lived experiences. For more information, please visit Ci3T.org.
Okay, so if you would just take a moment, we're going to take about 20 seconds as a speed to thinking and writing. What is one way you could integrate social skills or a behavioral objective into an upcoming lesson? So think about a lesson that you're leading or observing or coaching on. What might be one way that you can do that? What'll happen is, as people put ideas in the chat, they will all be great ideas to prompt your continued thinking on how to do this in your room. Okay, we've got modeling. Okay, lots of modeling and behaviors. Awesome. Oh, using situations at writing prompts. And we actually do have an illustration that provides kind of an example of that. That's a great one. So building it actually into the content of what you're doing academically. Group work, really providing some structure around teamwork, conflict management. Fantastic. Yeah, selection of examples, asking questions, helping them build out their ideas, read alouds, awesome. Character studies, conflict resolution, absolutely. Okay, thank you for those great ideas. Feel free to take snapshots of, of those great ideas and put them in your own notes. We're actually going to skip the second question because Elise is going to go a little bit deeper on that, and that way you'll actually have more information to think about that question in the next section. Then we also want to think about this 6-step instructional approach. So sometimes students will still need, even using a proactive instructional response, students will need us to help them navigate when their behaviors are not the expected ones for the class. And so we want to make sure that what we do is we have a practice in place that supports educators with students. When we don't have a practice in place is when we rely on things that actually require that kids be excluded from class, which we're trying to avoid. We want to keep kids engaged in instruction. So here are some resources that can have that conversation. And also in your implementation manual that Kathleen showed you at the beginning, you will see at the top of the reactive plan, what we call the 6-step instructional approach, which Kathleen alluded to. And really it's making sure that we're starting with empathy and yet we're keeping instruction moving so that all kids can remain engaged in learning. This is one of the resources that are available. It's a step-by-step approach. The module actually explains in narrative and with resources how you do each of these pieces. And then there's a quick reference guide for teachers to download or people to download as you are coaching others and what this process is. So we have a really respectful, responsive approach when students do need a little bit more of our instructional guidance. There is a video that's about 4 minutes long that is available, and it is embedded in this, so you're welcome to watch that. We recommend that you watch it alone and also share it with others. And when you go into the rooms, you have time to explore some resources. We would invite you to do that as well. All right, so if I can get by here. Okay. And again, just know that the modules are filled with these. So as you go into your next breakout room, after Elise takes us through some of the low intensity strategies, you'll have an opportunity to explore some of these things on your own. So I am going to hand it over to Elise.
So Wendy just kind of walked us through how do we approach this when our data is telling us that there's an opportunity to focus on tier 1. And in this section, we're going to focus on what do we do when our data is telling us there's an opportunity to focus on low intensity strategies, to really focus on some classroom level supports that are teacher led. So what that might look like is classroom level data where we're seeing that this amount of students in the low risk category is less than like 75 to 80%. Ideally, like our triangle would have like 75 to 80% of students needs are being met at tier 1. So when we're looking at this, we're seeing it's a little bit below that level. And there's a larger amount of students who are sitting up here in the moderate and high risk. And this is just one snapshot of a classroom. So that's telling us there's kind of a large amount of students who are exhibiting some higher level of need, both with externalizing and internalizing. And one way we can respond to these data is to think about what are some like classroom level supports we can provide. How do we like really empower and bolster teachers with some more strategies to put in their toolkit to help support students kind of across their classroom. And if you're in a school that is implementing Ci3T, you are likely to find these strategies listed in your manual. And it's this little snapshot up here that kind of tells you if you have a manual, you can open it up and find those. They're part of your primary tier 1 plan, and it falls in that academic column. And it might look something like this: using teacher delivered strategies, low intensity, to support students' active engagement and ability to participate really positively in that classroom environment. And we do have one module for each of these 7 strategies. I'm just briefly going to talk us through what they are, but if there's one that kind of strikes your fancy, we definitely encourage you to take a peek at those modules. These ones are also very popular, really bite-sized, a great way to kind of take a deeper dive into these strategies and what it looks like to implement that in a classroom. So these are listed alphabetically, not in ranked order, but just alphabetical. The first strategy is active supervision. I taught kindergarten, and this was the one I needed because recess was an experience. We had a lot of injuries from climbing up the slide, and there's just like a lot happening. And it was like, oh, we can really double down on active supervision. We can really think about where are the adults? What's my body language? How am I like really intentionally scanning? How am I like celebrating when students are meeting the expectation? How am I intervening quickly when students are not? So active supervision can be a great one for the cafeteria, the hallways, the playground, anywhere that it can just be extra helpful to have that presence. So students know that you're there, you see them when they're meeting the expectation, and you're going to celebrate that. And you see them when they're maybe not meeting the expectation, and you're going to go ahead and help them meet that expectation. The next one is arguably one of the most popular. Behavior-specific praise is kind of like the core of many of these strategies. It's one of the like highest leverage, probably where a lot of people choose to start because it's embedded in almost all the other ones. So behavior-specific praise is when we're giving these really clear statements to students. That is, as opposed to general praise, like good job. You tell me good job. I don't really know what I did well. I don't really know what I should do again. I can't really do a whole lot with that. But when you tell me like, hey, Elise, thanks for showing responsibility by putting those science materials away. I know exactly what I did. I know exactly what I should do again. And my peers behind me who maybe did not put their science materials away also heard that. And it's kind of like a little reminder that like, oh, I'm supposed to be putting these away. So this is also a great one if you're looking to kind of just shift the momentum. I know for me, sometimes it felt like all I could see were all of the things that were not going the way I wanted them to. But when I started really focusing on the positive, and when I started focusing on giving that really clear behavior specific praise, I also started feeling better because I started seeing it more. I started seeing the 2 students who were seated with crisscross applesauce on the carpet in their spot. And I could see and celebrate that instead of feeling overwhelmed by maybe the things that were not quite going the way I was hoping. High probability request sequence, or high P for short, is about building on behavioral momentum. So what you're going to do is you give 3 statements. They're called high P statements. It means high probability. It's something the student or your class is likely to do. So take out your pencil, pick up a piece of paper, open to page 12. These like quick things that I can do, and I'm building some momentum. And then you hit them with the low P request, the one that like maybe they weren't going to do if you started with it. So the like begin your independent work. But the idea being that we can kind of build up some momentum. We're doing it, we're praising it, feeling good, and then we kind of sneak in the one that's a little more challenging. It's kind of a fun one to think through. The next one is instructional choice. This one is where creativity can really come out. But this is about giving students choice. It's choice that they get to make, that you're okay with both options. So that could be things like, do you want to do your spelling work with the glitter pen or with the colored pencil? Like either one, you choose, that's fine. It could be like, when you walk into the classroom, the do nows on the board, there's 3 prompts, pick one. Cool. Here's your math worksheet, pick any 5. Different ways just to give kids some power, some choice, some autonomy, and to just kind of like, it reduces the demand a little. It's a little more fun when I get to pick where I want to start than like having to start at one. So it can be one way to like increase engagement and get kids a little more, just a little more with you. And then we've got instructional feedback, and this is about giving kids really specific and precise feedback, whether that's corrective, so maybe we're noticing a misconception that we want to intervene on, or feedback that it's like, you've got it, like great job using that multiplication chart to help you solve that problem. Also a little behavior specific praise, right? But like a little bit of an opportunity to give kids some feedback on the work that they're doing academically, that helps them continue to like shape and build up their behavior. Opportunities to respond is also a really fun one. It's about thinking about how do we just increase the rate where kids get to respond. So clickers, thumbs up, thumbs down, holding up colored cards right on your whiteboard and hold it up, choral response, like anything that's just like really quick and snappy. It's really hard to be off task when there's like lots of opportunities of things to do. So it's just thinking about how do I give my kids lots of chances to participate and be an active learner in this lesson. And then the last one is pre-correction. And that is just helpful reminders before you get started. So if I know I'm taking my class into the hallway, I'm going to give a quick pre-correct. I'm going to look at my matrix. I'm going to say, hey, remember, when we're in the hallway, we keep our hands to ourselves. We can appreciate the beautiful artwork with our eyes. If I know my kids really like touching everything as we go down the hallway, that's just like one quick positive way that I can frame that up. Then I'm going to like actively supervise, and I'm going to behavior specific praise, offer some behavior specific praise when I see kids meeting that expectation. So of course, we don't expect you to have memorized all of that. But as I was talking, would just love to see if you could pop into the chat, which low intensity teacher delivered strategy is one maybe you just use a lot already. And how do you kind of build that into your routines? Or which one were you like, oh, that's kind of interesting, I might want to try that. And if you need a reminder of what they are, I did pop that image there. So I'll give people some time to pop in the chat, thinking about either which one do you use and how do you build it in, or which one might you want to try. But yeah, opportunities to respond is good formative. You catch it earlier. I'm like, oh, we all are very confused right now. Let's pause. Yeah, the double whammy, Wendy. Pre-correction with behavior-specific praise. It's a match made in heaven. Yeah, lots of BSP. Well, if you're interested, we got a module for you. Awesome. All right. I'll let those keep coming in, but be sure to take a peek. Part of why we love to use the chat is it is a great opportunity to respond. And it's a good way to learn from each other. We are just so blessed to have this many people in a room together here to learn and grow and share. And I think it's just such a gift when we put in the chat, like, hey, here's how I do it, or here's what I'm thinking. There's just so much to learn from each other. So I really appreciate your being so chat active. It makes my heart very happy. And as we mentioned, we do have a module for each of these. Each of the low intensity strategies, they are purple. And I'm just going to highlight quickly like some of the things that are in there in case you wanted to explore. So for each of them, you're going to find things like videos that overview the steps of the strategy or some considerations for use. Those are great to watch, or if you're like a principal or a coach, you could email them out. We've got some infographics, which we'll talk through in a minute, and everything that would be needed to actually implement the intervention. So you'll find infographics that just have the like, what is this and how do I do it? You'll also find ones for like for instructional feedback there. It's showing you there's kind of two types. There's the one that's confirming the understanding, and it has some like sample scripts and prompts of what that can sound like. And then on the other side, it's got that correcting misunderstanding. And again, with just some sample language that could be really helpful. So these are people tend to really like these. They're bite-sized, great to send out and share, great to print out and put on your clipboard. But that might be something you're interested in. We've also got everything you would need to implement this. So the implementation checklist, the treatment integrity, the social validity, as Kathleen mentioned, we really want to make sure we're thinking about treatment integrity and social validity. Like, is this happening the way I intended? And what do people think about it? What do I think about it? And then there's family resources in these ones, which is really exciting. We built a lot of these out during COVID, but this is something that if you wanted to support families and using these strategies at home, we do have those materials as well. And if you're like, oh my gosh, Elise, this is riveting and I do want to learn more, I sure hope we see you in November and January because we are going to do some deep dives into these. So if there's one that we were like, oh, I kind of want to learn more about that. In November, we're going to talk about pre-correction and active supervision. And then in January, we're going to talk about instructional choice and opportunities to respond. And those are going to be deep dives with like 1 hour per strategy. What is it? How do I do it? And you're going to walk out with what you need to be able to do that the next day or to coach someone else to do that the next day. So we'd love for you to join us if that's something you're interested in. All right. So in this next breakout room, we've highlighted a lot of resources, a lot of modules we have that we hope might be helpful for you. So we're going to invite you to choose one breakout room to visit. That could be the supports and structures for behavior screening, if you're curious about behavior screening in general, the student risk screening scale, if you're curious about that specific tool and what it looks like to screen with that. This embedding and integrating is the one where the integrated lesson plan that Wendy talked us through, that's where those resources are. The 6-step instructional approach is the one that Wendy mentioned. And then we are highlighting 2 of the low intensity strategies. These are the ones we're not going to do an empower session on, so we wanted to give you a chance to explore. So behavior specific praise or instructional feedback. So I will stop sharing. And with that, we will invite you to select the breakout room that you are most excited to explore. And one of our coaches will be there to help get you set up. Everybody else, we are now going to go into our last big section, and this is about what do I do when my screening data is telling me that it's time to connect kids to tier 2 and tier 3 supports. So we're going to spend some time thinking about what does that process look like and what are some tools that can help us do that. So first up, can't have any conversation about tier 2 or tier 3 without going over, I feel like, clarifications or misconceptions. And these came from you all. These came from people telling us like, hey, here's what people have a hard time kind of wrapping their brain around when it comes to tier 2 or tier 3. So we've got this nifty little infographic, which is coming from that tier 2 process module. And the first thing is just to remember that language really matters. There are no tier 2 kids or yellow kids or bubble kids. It's about students who need tier 2 supports, or students who are receiving tier 2 supports would benefit from tier 2 or tier 3 supports. But really thinking about the language we're using to talk through those kiddos and what their needs are. And then it's also thinking about just various locations. So tier 2 is not a place. It's not like to get a tier 2 support or a tier 3 support, you need to leave my classroom and go somewhere else. But it is about the type of support we're providing, which could be provided in the classroom, in a counselor's office, in the cafeteria, lots of different locations. And similar thinking with supports versus people. When we're talking about tier 2, we're thinking about the support that's in place, not necessarily like who's providing it. So it's not going to be like, oh, it's Miss Saracen's reading group. It's like, it is a reading group that uses potentially this curriculum or this intervention. Lots of people can provide tier 2, general education teachers, paraprofessionals, special education teachers, reading specialists, behavior interventionists, like lots of people can provide tier 2. So we really want to think about the support, not necessarily the human. And then thinking about integration. I think that's one of the most exciting things about Ci3T is thinking about how do we integrate the supports we provide for kids to meet their academic, behavioral, and social and emotional well-being needs. So when we think about like, what would our data look like that might tell us it's time to intervene at tier 2 and tier 3? Mostly what we're looking for is that green section again, that's like 75 or 80% or higher. This would be internalized and externalizing. We also want to take a peek, kind of as Wendy spoke about, with how different ways to break down the data. So at grade level or department level, whatever makes the most sense for your setting. But we're just looking for like consistently across the board, overwhelmingly, students' needs are being met at tier 1. So tier 1 is in place, treatment integrity is likely very high, which means we can start spending our time really thinking about allocating resources at tier 2 and tier 3, because the ratio is right. The amount of kids who would need and benefit from tier 2 probably matches our capacity to provide that. And when it's time to do that, we're going to focus on a variety of different data sources. So we're going to think about attendance, because it's really hard to provide a meaningful intervention that's going to move the needle if a student is not a regular attender. So maybe before we connect them with that academic or behavioral or integrated intervention, we might actually intervene on attendance first, get them to school every day, so they're getting that really great tier 1 instruction, and then we can continue to support at different levels. We're going to think about their behavior screening data, as well as all of the different sources of information we have about academics across domains. Well, with that information, we're going to kind of follow this 3-step process. So first, if you're at a school implementing Ci3T, you're going to get out your manual and you're going to look at those tier 2 intervention grid and tier 3 intervention grid to think about what are the supports that are available at my school. If you're at a school that's not implementing tier 3, you're going to think about your it's not imaginary, I can't think of the word, your figurative toolkit, right? Like, what are the tier 2 and tier 3 interventions that you have at your disposal? What is offered by your district or your school? What are ones that you could get access to and you could build up your proficiency? So thinking about what are the interventions that I can kind of pick from? What is my data telling me? We're going to look at our data, and then we're going to make decisions, and we're going to capture those decisions. So we've got a good record of here are the students who are receiving additional supports, and here's how that's going. So in your Ci3T manual are these tier 2 and tier 3 intervention grids. And this is one of the first things I learned about Ci3T, and it blew my little mind because I was like, this makes so much sense to just offer to people like, here's what's offered at our school. Like, it's about transparency. This is a way to just transparently say, like, here are the supports we have available. Here's what that looks like. So again, it starts with that like title, not someone's name, not like a location, but like, this is what the support is. A brief description, just so we're really clear on like, here's kind of what happens in this intervention. The school-wide entry criteria. So that's thinking about for whom might this be a good fit. So thinking about like screening data, what level of risk would a student be at for this to really benefit them? What other indicators are we looking at, like office discipline referrals or passing grades or missing assignments, things like that. And then we want to think about the data to progress monitor. So if we do connect a student to this support, what are we going to look at to know if it's working? So student outcome data, whether that's academic or behavioral, like what are we progress monitoring, but also that social validity. What does the student think about it? What does the family think about it? What does the educator think about it? And treatment integrity. Is it happening as planned? Because we can't say if something's working if we don't really know if it's happening. And then last is exit criteria. This is not like join an intervention and stay for your entirety. It's join us. We think this is a good fit for you. We're going to work really hard to get this in place. And then we're going to look at the data and make a decision about, did this work? And are you ready to kind of be exited? Or is this not yet working? And we need to either connect you with a more intensive intervention or a different intervention. So that exit criteria is really important so that we don't just have kids stuck kind of getting check in, check out for 4 years in a row, which sounds really fun for the kid because they get to check in with someone cool, but maybe is a little strapping on resources. So we want to think about, how do we know when it's time to fade this intervention? So in your manual, again, that looks like that tier 2 grid. And we're just going to highlight a few kind of popular ones that we've got some modules to accompany. Behavior contracts is a great one, like elementary through high school. And we actually are going to be hosting an Empower session all about behavior contracts. So if this is something you might be interested in learning more about or implementing with students or staff that you work with, we'd love to see you in February. It's a whole session, 2 hours on behavior contracts. What is it? How do I do it? Walk out with what you need to be able to implement this. So I'm really looking forward to that one. It's going to be great and you should definitely go. Another one to think through is direct behavior rating. Pretty similar, another really great one that can help connect kids with this ability to kind of a little bit like self-monitor how they're doing. So kind of rating that engagement or being on task, kind of behaviors like that, gives the teacher and a student a way to really feasibly measure that and talk about it and set goals around how we can move the needle there. And if that's something you might want to learn more about, we'd love to see you in March. Again, we're going to go do a whole 2 hours on that one. DBR is super, super feasible. Teachers tend to really like it. So we'd love to share more about that in March with you. There's also going to be a variety of academic ones. So if you've got maybe students who are struggling with writing, SRSD for writing could be a great fit, and that there's like an expansive body of literature on its efficacy for elementary all the way up. So if that's something that you're like, ooh, I'm kind of interested in that, we invite you to review that module. It's just a great way to teach kids really bite-sized instructional pieces for how do I like organize my writing and just become like a stronger thinker and writer. So really great resource there. And same kind of thinking at tier 3. So you're going to have that grid with those options. And there's just many evidence-based, validated tier 3 supports that you could get in place. That could be something like functional assessment-based intervention. That's an intensive intervention about finding out the reason why a student behavior is happening and then building out a tailored plan to help support that student in either gaining a new replacement behavior, so teaching that replacement behavior, or maybe adjusting some things in the environment that would just make it more likely that replacement behavior occurs, or shifting those contingencies to make sure we've got lots of reinforcement available for when the student is engaging in appropriate behavior. This is a really fun team-based approach with the family and the teacher and the student, and it's just a really fun time. And if you would love to come learn more about that, we'd love to see you in April. And we've got a whole module series that's being built out. The intro is ready and step 1 is ready, and we're building out the rest of those over the next couple of months to walk people through that process. Another really popular one from our websites or what we get requested to give presentations on is the individualized de-escalation plan. And this is about understanding that acting out cycle, the stages of the acting out cycle, what it looks like for that specific student and how we can intervene at each level. Because for the first couple levels, there are off ramps. So like, what can we do to like get on that off ramp and really think about what does this look like for the student? And if this is something you're interested in, we did lead an Empower series on this last year. So that video recording is still available on our website on the PL tab where you went to sign up for today's session. If you scroll to the bottom, there's some orange rows and you can find the one that was about managing the acting out cycle. That one's pretty popular. You could watch the presentation if you wanted. And again, you'll have those academic ones. So like Read 180 or Seeing Stars, those tier 3 validated interventions for students with intensive needs. And you might be asking yourself, like, how am I supposed to choose? You might notice as you're looking at these, like, man, these have like really similar entry criteria. Like check in, check out, and DBR and behavior contracts are really similar and who might be a good fit. Like, how am I supposed to know which one to pick? And this is where we say to lean on the team. So first and foremost, we want to make sure we're collaborating with families and colleagues and students to review the options that are available. And then like us as educators are like the best detectives. You know your students, right? So think about, what do you know about the student? What are their strengths? What are their preferences? Are there any prerequisite skills that a student would need to engage in this intervention? So kind of think about what you already know about the student. And then thinking a little bit about function of behavior. So like, why is the behavior happening? So like, as an example, check in, check out is really effective for students who are like motivated by attention. So when they like that adult attention, and that could be a function for their behavior, I shout out a lot, or I disrupt the classroom because I'm getting teacher attention. Check in, check out can be really great for that because I'm going to get the attention no matter what. Like, I don't have to do anything to get it. I'm going to get it at the beginning and end of my day no matter what. And that can just be a really good fit. So you might want to think about that. Also consider your own strengths. What are the supports available to you? Do you have a coach? Is there professional learning you could go to? What feels feasible given your classroom or your role? That's really important that we're thinking about that. That's that social validity, right? Like, what do I think about this? Does this feel feasible? Do I think it'll work? And then we adjust based on social validity. If you connect with a kid and you talk with them about this self-monitoring intervention and they're like, I'm not doing that. You probably shouldn't do that intervention. It's probably not going to work, right? So like if a student tells you I'm not doing that, it's like, okay, great. Tell me more about why. Oh, it feels embarrassing to have that out on the paper, on the table. Like, do you want to put it in a folder? Do you want to do like a digital form? Like, how can we work with the student to find a middle ground? But that can be a good way to help you kind of decide. So at this point, I'm going to walk us through an example of how we can use this Ci3T data dashboard as an example of how we look at multiple sources of data. But I'm going to go to our professional learning tab, ci3.org/PL for professional learning. Looks like this. I'm going to scroll down to the green accordion, the one that says data informed instruction. And then I'm going to open this handout. And it's going to make you make a copy. So I'm going to do that. And now I've got this copy set up and I'm going to pop some filters on. So where it says create a filter, I'm just going to highlight this row and say filter. Now it's going to let me play with my data. It's going to let me look around and see what I notice. The other thing that I have open is a Ci3T manual from our COVID page. But if you go to the COVID tab, which is ci3t.covid, we've got 3 sample implementation manuals, an elementary, a middle, and a high school. And I've got the elementary one open. So what I'm going to do first, I got all my data. This is all fake data. These are all just totally made up. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm curious about my students who are having some internalizing concerns. So I'm going to come over here at my fall SRSSIE, that's my behavior screener, and I'm going to look for internalizing. And I know that for that, it's for kids who scored a 2 or higher. So my yellows are my moderate risk and my reds are my high risk. So I'm looking, I'm like, okay, here's what we've got. And now I'm going to see like what's going on academically with this crew. So I'm looking and everything's really nice and color coded, which is fantastic. And I'm seeing, oh, I've got a couple of students who seem to be struggling with their oral reading fluency. This is their percentile. So we're feeling a little bit anxious, nervous, maybe withdrawn, and we're having a little bit of a hard time here in reading. So I'm going to go ahead and filter that. I'm going to filter by color. All right, so I've got these 2 students. The next thing I'm going to think about now is attendance. I just want to make sure, are these students regular attenders? And I've got a 0 and a 5. And I think, yeah, it's early October, like 5 absences is probably as high as I would want to go, but I feel good about this. I think if they had 5 absences and it was the 4th week of school, I might be like, oh, I don't know about that. But at this point, most of the time they're here. Or maybe I know they had 5, but they had strep throat. So like, I'm not really worried about that. So I've got these 2 students who've got some internalizing concerns and an area of need in reading. So then what I would do is I would go to my manual, sample elementary tier 2 intervention grids. And I would start to look and see like what supports might be a good fit. So I'm looking at phonemic awareness and thinking to myself, well, actually the gap here is in oral reading fluency. And I actually have some knowledge about this student, especially. I'm looking here, their nonsense word fluency is pretty high. So I'm actually guessing that's probably not an area of need, is their phonics or fluency with that nonsense word fluency score. Oh, here's an option, fluency. Okay, my sidewalks. Got it. I can read about what it is. I can think about what are the types of students this might be a good fit for. Yep, that's seeming right as far as percentile. Okay, that could be an option. And I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to look and look and look and see what are some options that might be a good fit. Like repeated readings is on there. There's another different small group reading option. And I'm going to think about those. I'm going to think about like which one do I think would be a good fit for those students and feels the most feasible for me, and decide which one I want to do. And because I know these students have some needs in the internalizing area, I'm probably thinking to myself, how can I layer in some additional supports around strategies to manage anxious feelings? So one that is not in that module, or that is not in that intervention grid because it hadn't been created yet, is this intervention we have called Set a Goal, Select a Strategy, Record Progress. And this is a tier 2 intervention package. It's for self-monitoring during reading. And this is probably the one I would choose for this group of kids. And I would have them work together to build up those connections and relationships. It would allow me a chance to help them like self-monitor whether they're using their strategies. We could also layer in some like a breathing strategy or positive self-talk, something like that. We could sprinkle in some of that into the self-monitoring. So that's probably what I would do with that information. And then how do I document what I decided, right? Like, okay, I've got these 2 kids and this is the intervention. How do I make sense of what I'm going to do next? And in this module, we do offer 2 tools that are completely customizable. This class at a glance planner would have all of your kids and you would just be able to kind of check off who's receiving what, just gives you a good idea of what's going on. Or another version, which is just the next tab over. Sorry, my computer's been a little pokey. It gives you that idea of student, what's the interventions they're receiving, what's the status. I love that you can link to the data source here. So this is a great one-stop shop for everyone in my class who's receiving support that I can just kind of click through and get to what I need. So I think that is a nifty tool. And this module has a ton of fantastic resources. It's got to be one of my favorites. If you are like, man, I'd love to see someone kind of walk through that decision-making process more. David Royer and what a principal very kindly did this walkthrough with some sample data for us, and very, very helpful. So you can kind of see exactly what it looks like to manage those multiple data sources. There's a simulation if you want to practice on your own. And again, we do have those trackers completely customizable with videos of how to like set them up and all of that jazz. And again, if you're like, oh, I'm kind of curious about seeing a Ci3T implementation manual, we do have those exemplars on the website that you're welcome to peruse. All right, and as we get ready for this next breakout room, who wanted to give you a choice of where you want to continue your learning based on where you're at and what kind of supports are available for at your school or the things you're feeling really excited about. So if you're in a spot where you're like, you know what, I actually just really want to look at that module. And honestly, you can look at any module, but if you're like, I want to look at this module or another module you talked about today, we've got a room set up to do that. And one of our staff will make sure you're able to log in, and then it's just time on your own to check that out. If you're like, that was interesting, I kind of want to see some more examples. I want someone to talk through and show me some more examples. We're going to have these facilitated breakout rooms, and there's two. One is kind of like a getting started, which will be really similar to what I just walked through. We kind of just click through and work on it. And then the next one's like advanced. It'll be a little more nuanced, probably a little quicker pace. So if you're someone who's really fluent with Google Sheets and you're like, cool, I want to like dig into the details, Mark's going to go ahead and lead that one up. So there are two options there based on how spicy you're feeling. And then if you're like, actually, I just want to practice this, we've got one set up for independent sample data. And that is just using that spreadsheet that I was just using. And you can use one of the manuals from our website. And you can just practice on your own. What if this was your class, what would you do? Just time to practice. Or if you have your own data where you're like, I want to practice with my kids and my data, we've got space for you to do that too. And someone from our team will be there in case you have any questions. We can help you problem solve. And we've also got some people on deck to do some consultation. If you're like really stuck or really want someone just to help you figure out how to navigate, we've definitely got people teed up for you.
Thank Elise for planning such an interactive evening. Systematic screening is one of my favorite topics because I think it gives us the data we need to really provide the gift of customized instruction to kids. It allows teachers to have the information they know, whether they're doing whole class instruction, knowing like if I've got a bunch of kids in my class that have higher internalizing issues relative to past years, and I know I might need to start slow in the sense of rather than giant whole class discussions, I might as a teacher encourage people to write 3 ideas down and then share them with a shoulder partner and build up trust. It also allows, I think, a really respectful way of making sure that students do not get overlooked, because that is honestly my biggest concern, is that there will be some kids that we will miss. The upside of screening is that the consequences of screening a kid in for extra support is mean they get something extra. It might be higher rates of behavior specific praise. It might be check in, check out. It's going to give me what I need to really do well with my instruction for the class as a whole. My biggest concern as like a parent and as a researcher is that we're going to overlook kids that might need more. And importantly, screening allows us to look at our system. That graph that Wendy showed you that had the 4 triangles about reading, math, motivation to learn, and pro-social behavior, that was a school that was just like screaming for like, we need support with tier 1. I have so much respect for that principal. She used those data. That was her very first time of screening at the beginning of their integrated tiered system. And she took those data to her board and said, what we're doing district-wide about giving everybody a lot of flexibility about what's happening where, maybe working other places, but it's not working here. She used her data to advocate for her kids. And she inspires me. So we're so thankful to have the gift of your time. I know some of you who have heard me before are probably sick of hearing this, but time is precious and tomorrow is not guaranteed. And I just am so deeply thankful that you invested 2 hours of your life to come think about how we can put screening into schools to use it to serve kids better and build positive, productive, equitable learning environments. And if our commitment truly is to close gaps in performance from different groups of kids, we have to close gaps in access. And so we're hopeful that this series, and we even added 2 sessions this year based on the feedback that we received. We hope that like last session kind of explained a little bit about the why of doing one giant integrated tiered system. And tonight I hope set the stage for the value of systematic screening. And even if you've been implementing tiered systems for 15 years, 10 years, 20 years, it will always be data informed, but you will differentiate how you're using the data to make decisions. So as new things are learned from the scientific community, we'll put those in place. And if we learn that some strategies or practices or programs are not as effective as we once thought they were, they're going to come out. It's how you weed the garden. So I'm hoping that people really enjoyed tonight hearing about the multiple uses of systematic screening. And I really want to thank the presenters for tonight, Wendy and Elise, for doing just an incredible job. When you come back next time, and we do hope that you'll come back, in November, we will be picking up with some strategies. So as Elise mentioned, we're going to have next time where you're coming to learn specifically to do those strategies. This would be an excellent time to think about, like, are there family members in your community that you might want to bring? Because these are practical strategies that can be used not just in schools, but in other areas within the community. And that's going to happen for the next 2 sessions. And then following that, we're going to spend an evening just on behavior contracts, just on direct behavior ratings, and an evening on Elise's favorite topic, functional assessment-based interventions. I was sharing a little bit about Tammy's journey as a principal, and one of the things that she did that I thought was so strategic, like when she looked ahead at those evenings and those sessions, she always invited 2 people from her elementary building to come and to learn that content, and then they brought it up back to them. They didn't do a full 2-hour session, but they brought back that content and shared it. So as you're thinking about building out your professional learning journey and knowing that things are happening in your district and your building, you might have just time for a 10-minute tip for success at every faculty and staff meeting or a monthly principals meeting. Think about what you're going to put in front of people that can be practically and effectively used. So tonight, as you know, we focused on systematic screening, and that we're using those data to do 3 things: to inform Tier 1 practices, to empower teachers to really look at their data in their classroom and manage that, and importantly, how to use multiple sources of data, as Elise was illustrating, to connect kids to supports. So when we come back next time, the goal is to continue to put tools in people's toolkits. So thank you again for the gift of your time, and we hope to see you next time. Here's our very famous closing slide. And Eric is our fearless leader in terms of engaging us in social media. So if you are so inclined, if you would, feel free to post things on X or on Instagram. And thank you again for coming and joining us. We wish you a wonderful evening, and we'll hang out here in case you have any questions.